members are present, except for Councilmember Rosansky, who is excused.
Okay, first item is clarification of items on the consent calendar. Councilwoman Gardner?
Nothing?
Councilman Curry?
Yes, the
Number 11, I'm going to pull that decision.
Councilmember Gardner is going to pull item 11 later this evening for discussion. We can save it till then.
Okay, Councilmember Webb? Councilmember Henn?
None.
Mayor Pro Tem Daigle?
Item 14, it's an award of a contract for the Corona Del Mar beach concessions, and according to our revenue policy, we've got to be comparison shoppers, and one thing that would be helpful would be a spreadsheet that would delineate the companies that applied and their ranking. Apparently, there's a 4-point criteria, so if that could be disclosed, that would be helpful.
Staff is intending to continue that item tonight to a future agenda, but when we come back, we will have that breakdown.
Great, thank you.
Okay, and I have nothing. Okay, our first discussion item is water quality grants.
Mr. Mayor, if we could, I think Dave Kiff is still at disaster preparedness training, so if we could take the first item, the CALTRANS protocol, I would appreciate it.
Okay, let's do that one then.
Okay. Thank you, Homer. Mayor, members of council, as you're most painfully aware of, back in September, we had a little bit of a traffic snafu on Coast Highway from Dover Drive to the Arches interchange through Mariners Mile. And apparently what had happened was there was a Caltrans signal contractor that actually shut down the signal at Dover Drive and Coast Highway without notifying anyone here at the city, actually in violation of Caltrans' own policies. As you well know, that the resulting traffic jam was horrendous, and it required our police department to respond and try to get things back under control. But with the signal out, it was kind of futile. Kind of sparked some interest on how we coordinate our projects with Caltrans. And in fact, just last week I had the opportunity to sit down with Cindy Kwan, the district director for Caltrans, District 12, and her deputy directors, Jim Beal and James Pinero. And we had actually had a great discussion, and certainly they wanted me to pass along to you their deepest apologies for that incident. That was not, the Caltrans contractor was not authorized to work during those peak hours. And in fact, their staff should have notified city staff of their work in that area, and they failed to do so. And I think it's mostly agreed that probably the problem lies in the fact that they have some new personnel that weren't aware of who to talk to and when to talk to city staff. As you might be aware, in the past, we've actually had some pretty good coordination with Caltrans. This was the first opportunity that's been kind of a glitch. We've had some ongoing construction out there currently that's a little bit aggravating because of the location of the work right now. But we did kind of come to agreement on several areas. One, we agreed to, we're going to meet on a quarterly basis with Caltrans maintenance construction staff and the permit staff so that they can kind of talk about what's coming up, what they can do together to work together. We also asked for some various restrictions on their contracts, and there are usual restrictions that we use on our projects as well. The hours of work, 9 to 3, using changeable message signs in advance of the work, prohibiting work during Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, the boat parade, holiday weekends, and also in advance of holiday weekends on Fridays, and also no work on the evenings, in the evenings or on weekends unless the city agrees that it's permitted. Also notification by the contractor to not only our staff but police dispatch to let them know when there's going to be lane closures, and that they'll provide all the information necessary for emergency contacts. We also agreed that we're going to do a better job notifying each other when emergencies pop up. Occasionally there's a problem out there, and sometimes city staff's the last to know, and certainly, you know, there are things that can be done by staff and the police department that can maybe help smooth things out when there are emergencies. Also, to kind of help their situation, we agreed to kind of be a partner with them. And when they do have projects, we're going to go ahead and take up the charge of notifying the residents, since we have, and local businesses, since we have the contacts. We know the players involved. We know who's going to be affected. We're better equipped to get the word out to folks. So we're going to kind of try this in the future here, and then kind of serve as their notification team to get the word out when there are new projects. In fact, currently we're putting together a press release regarding all the current projects that are out there right now, try to give folks a rough idea of how long they're going to go on and what the impacts might be. Unfortunately, this is a really tough time. We have some real problems out there. CALTRANS has a streetlight installation project which started probably about 6-8 months ago, and it's still ongoing. They've given a permit to the gas company to relocate their gas line. That'll probably go on for another 3 weeks. They need to do that in order to do some new traffic signal installations. They're going to put new traffic signals at Riverside Coast Highway and Tustin Coast Highway. Kind of similar to the work that was done in Dover Drive. They're going to try to get rid of those center poles for safety reasons, so they're going to have longer mast arms. So hopefully that project will, now that project is kind of planned to start this month. In fact, it already has to some extent. Probably continue through the month of March as well. And then right after that, they're planning on doing a paving project from Dover Drive all the way to the Arches Bridge. So there's a lot of work scheduled, and we really want to get down with them and get all the details out to folks and try to get this information out early. I know we've gotten a lot of calls regarding the project, and as you might assume, most folks assume that it's something the city has full control of. And Coast Highway from Jamboree to the Santa Ana River is under the control of CALTRANS. We don't really have any authority, although I think we've got a good relationship with CALTRANS that we can work with them and hopefully at least minimize the pain. Unfortunately, we don't have the authority to tell them, no, you can't do that work now or do it later, but they have been very agreeable, and they do take our requests, and I think they've been pretty gracious in following our requests so far to date. We're also looking at some future work on Coast Highway. Sanitation District has several projects in mind over the next few years. And as Homer and I were talking this morning, one of the things that we probably ought to start thinking about is, do we really want to have control of this street? Should we start looking at taking control of Coast Highway? Just a question that I throw out there, just something that we ought to consider at some point in time, because we really don't have a lot of control over this roadway, and there's a lot of future things going on. Maybe the time to do it is right after they do all the paving and get it nice, new, and neat. So just a thought. And with that, any questions, if you have the answer.
I have a question.
Councilwoman Gardner.
I'm coming north, so there is a sign that says work, but it hasn't been too much coming north. But I do notice when I've had to drive that southbound looks like it is jammed. I mean, just, I don't know, way past Superior. Do we have, I know we put up flashing signs occasionally about expect delays. Have we been giving anything like expect delays of, do we give time limits to maybe persuade people that they might want to take Brookhurst, they might want to take Superior or some other way?
Yeah, I believe the current sign just says expect delays. Doesn't really give you a whole lot of information, and that's probably leads to a lot of frustration. Caltrans well, this is a permit project, so we're not exactly sure of the schedule. So it's kind of hard to tell. We do know it might be 3 weeks. It's sometimes difficult to get the whole message on that flashing sign, though. That's kind of the challenge here, is what information do you really want to give? One of the things that we thought of, though, is that sign probably ought to be moved back to the other side of Superior, because folks could then maybe go up Superior and cut across.
Right, and maybe, I mean, obviously, it would be impossible for us to predict at any one time how much, but if we say major delays, that might underline it's not just going to be your usual stop and go for a couple of minutes.
It has been better lately. When it first went into effect, it was pretty bad, but folks are figuring it out.
Councilman Curry.
Yeah, Steve, what has been the level of cooperation with Caltrans in ensuring that the work is not sort of right in the middle of summer? Have they been pretty cooperative in terms of that, or the boat parade, or other specific times when road work is really not optimal there?
Yes, in fact, this current work that the gas company is doing was actually scheduled to start in December, and we met with them and said, you know, this would be best to start after the first of the year, and they were very accommodating, so they did push that back. So they will work with us, I think, if we give them good information and give them, you know, our reasons why. They know better than to try to come down here on the boat during the boat parade and those kinds of things. They also realize that it's expensive for them to try to do construction in the summer because it's just impossible to manage, and things end up costing more because it takes longer.
Councilman Hill?
Yeah, I'd like to commend our city staff. I think we do a better job generally. I realize we had this one problem, but I think we do a better job generally than some of our neighboring cities. And I specifically recollect Caltrans doing a 2-week project on Main Street leading into Laguna Beach the 2 weeks before Christmas. Completely shut down Christmas for those retailers in that city. It was terrible. I did have a question regarding your plan, or Caltrans' work. These signals that are being replaced, by any chance, are we trying to coordinate with them with regard to whether these signals could fold into a traffic synchronization solution along PCH, you know, as we're trying to do things elsewhere under our control?
Well, that's one of the issues that we're facing. The Caltrans traffic signal system is, with the section that they own, their signals are coordinated, but they don't really tie in with the city's system. So, they have indicated their willingness to work with us on that, but their number one priority is to regional traffic. So there are times when they probably give more priority on the main line than they would any of the crossing streets, which, depending on your point of view, is good and bad. But, yeah, they will work with us on that. And ultimately, if we do assume ownership of the highway, then we do have that opportunity to kind of change things out a little bit.
Yeah, I was thinking in terms of compatibility with the controllers we intend to install, or the software we intend to use, if there's any way to, because they really are bracketed by city-controlled streets, you would think they would be receptive to that.
I think we'll definitely keep that in mind, especially as we change out our system. Our current system, our older units, do not interface too well with the Caltrans units. And as you might recall, the problems we've had making Jamboree and Coast Highway work with the Back Bay Jamboree signal. That's because the two systems aren't that compatible. But the system that we are switching to is very much compatible with the Caltrans. So that's good news.
Councilman Webb?
I think that Steve kind of hit it on the head when he mentioned the possibility of us taking it over. I know that it seems like a very large responsibility for us to do, but I think that if we are going to improve traffic circulation, at least through Mariner's Mile, that if we don't have it under our jurisdiction, we will not be able to accomplish what we need to accomplish in the way of getting a 6-lane roadway through there, because Caltrans will require us to use standards that will require us to acquire more than the 12 feet of right-of-way that we have in our general plan to accommodate the additional work on Coast Highway. I had a talk with Cindy Kwan at a Transportation Corridor Agency meeting in December and asked about getting our staffs together to meet, and she seemed I'm glad to see that this has come through. I think that the more proactive our construction inspection staff can be in trying to get to know Caltrans inspectors, the better we will be able to do the coordination type work that we're looking at. I think that one of the things that we are going to have ourselves recognize is that the major construction projects on Coast Highway, there's no place else for the utilities, and there's no parallel route to Coast Highway, and so that means that we're going to have to put up with delays, and we need to take into consideration the more restrictions that we place as far as hours are concerned, the longer those construction projects are going to take. This is when we may possibly have to consider nighttime work in some of our projects in spite of the unfortunate keeping some people awake situation. So we're going to have to weigh length of construction projects versus inconvenience to the public on all these things. And if it's under our jurisdiction or Caltrans, the same things are going to occur. So that we just hopefully that, we will be able to get out the message to our people in Newport Beach a lot easier than Caltrans was, because they don't have the PR people that we do. But I think that we really seriously do need to look at taking it over. Probably it would need to be from Newport Boulevard to Jamboree as opposed to all the way to the bridge, because if we wanted to go to the bridge in the Santa Ana River, we would have to get concurrence from Huntington Beach, probably to abandon it all the way to Brookhurst, because usually Caltrans won't release jurisdictions unless it's at major street intersections, and Brookhurst would be the next major intersection. So that's one of the things to think about.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Steve, we have something on the agenda tonight, and it's about an underground utility district, and it's right where we're talking about. So when we're talking about Caltrans then doing a paving project in the next few months, and yet if this underground utility project is voted on tonight, that's certainly something that we seem like there needs to be some kind of coordination there.
Yeah.
There are too many poles on Coast Highway. They've already been underground.
Yeah, I think most of it is in the side streets, but I think, Homer, you're correct that there is going to have to be a lot of coordination on something like that. Additionally, we have we're going to be repaving Superior Avenue from up top of the hill there, Ticonderoga Street, all the way up to the city line. So, as an alternative route, that doesn't look too good either. So, we're going to try to juggle it as best we can. We're under a deadline to spend grant funding on that particular roadway, so we really can't delay our project. We need to get it done before summer. So we're going to have to kind of work around each other, and coordination is going to be the name of the game.
Well, I think we ought to be looking into taking over the highway for the reasons Councilman Webb indicated. But I do have one question on it. If we were to take that segment over from Newport Boulevard to Jamboree, do we have to take the bridge over the bay and assume that responsibility, or is that something that can remain with the state? Because it seems like that might be a huge financial responsibility to assume.
I would assume they'd want us to take it. They wouldn't want an isolated piece of highway, but you never know. It's all in the negotiation, I guess.
And do we have to, when we did the taking over the highway in Corona Del Mar, well, first of all, when we started that process, the state had a policy of giving funds to bring it up to a state of good repair, I guess was the term that they used. And we started that process. We were looking at possibly getting around $7 million, if I remember correctly, but by the time we got through it with the condition of the state budget, we ended up getting a little over $3 million, and my understanding now is that the policy is that you virtually get $0 out of the state. So is that the situation now? And then also in Corona Del Mar, we had to get a bill passed through the legislature to actually get the relinquishment process going. Is that still the process, or is there another process that they use now?
It's still, yeah, I think you're correct on both counts. They still do the resolution. They got to go through the CTC in order to approve the transfer. But I don't necessarily know if it needs exactly legislation anymore, because I think Caltrans right now is looking for ways to get rid of the state highways, and you're correct that they're not offering any money with it, which would seem kind of opposed to trying to get rid of highways. But as you know, the state's fairly strapped right now, and I think we're one of the last cities to actually get payment to take coast highways. So I can't tell you what the future is going to bring on that.
It's my understanding it's a CTC process now, especially if there's no money that has to be, come from the legislature's budget.
And then would I presume that the Arches Bridge would remain with Caltrans, since that's a state state route that's really part of Newport Boulevard and not Coast Highway?
There's an interesting twist to that. They could potentially extract from us, if we wanted to get rid of that, us taking over that plus the piece down to Finley on Newport Boulevard, because they've been trying to get rid of that for quite a long period of time. It's a state highway down to the entrance to City Hall.
Oh, it is?
There's a little stub in there. And that includes the Channel Bridge as well as the Arches Interchange bridges. And so really the biggest disadvantage that I can possibly see that could potentially hurt the city is if we had some sort of major failure of the bridge over the Back Bay. Because that's going to be probably, I don't know, $35 million project if it ever had to be replaced. However, it's only 25 years old. It's probably got another at least 25 to maybe 50 years left in it. So we can pass that on to maybe some other people.
Well, how does that bridge stack up under all this seismo retrofitting that they've been going through? Was that an identified risk or anything like that? And
I don't believe that one is. That was designed after the Silmar quake, I think.
It was after somewhere, but, yeah.
There have been some earthquakes where they've changed the designs and improved them, but I don't believe that one has on their FHWA ratings have been a concern.
Okay, then one final question. You mentioned that the Sand District had some projects that we're going to have to be coordinating on Coast Highway. So we're going to be doing a nice clean paving job on the highway, then we're going to be cutting it back up again?
Unfortunately, I think the Sand District projects are probably a couple of years away. So, yeah, the answer to that is unfortunately that's probably true.
They have two projects. One project is the replacement of the Rocky Point sewer pump station, which is now currently at the Balboa Bay Club. They're putting it across the street from Orange Coast College. And there will be some piping work that has to be done to literally go all the way across the highway. And they're major pipes, and this is something that we might want to consider for nighttime work and because of the type of work. The other project is that they have one of their transmission mains, I think it's the gravity main, needs to be lined because they found some rust spots in it at some of the high points. And in doing that, they will have to open up probably sections of the pipeline, uncover it for maybe 20 to 40 feet, and slip a lining in, and then at the other end pull it through. And I don't know whether these are 100 feet or 200 feet or 300 feet apart to do it, but it's going to be a pretty significant, and I think that particular line, though, is over in the number 3 lane or the curve lane.
So that's something they'll be able to do without actually tearing the entire street up, just
Right,
in certain segments.
Yeah, they'll just do chunks. But it's terrible to have a brand-new paved street with big patches in it.
Yeah. Councilwoman Daigle?
If, in fact, it is a CTC process, we have a CTC Commissioner in Residence, Marion Bergerson, who helped us a lot with Sunset Ridge Park, so it might be something that she could help us out with, if that's where the council wanted to go.
Any other comments? Do you need any direction from us on anything?
No, I don't think so. It sounds like council is pleased with the protocol that we worked out, and it's something that, since we'll have quarterly meetings now with the Caltrans staff, I think that will help out a lot.
Okay. Back to our first item on the agenda, water quality grants. See, Dave has arrived.
Thank you, Mayor Solich and council members. I'm going to go through a PowerPoint presentation. And also, just to when you have questions for us, I may refer to Bob Stein with our Public Works Department and Mr. Badum. So I'm going to talk first about what are Newport Beach's water quality issues. And please bear with me a little bit. You're very familiar with them, but maybe some of the folks at home are not. 2 of the 34 so-called areas of special biological significance, or ASBSs, statewide are in Newport Beach. Little Corona is one, so is Crystal Cove. And the State Water Resources Control Board is preparing to condition the city on allowable pollutant discharges from these coastal canyons into ASBSs. In other words, they're discussing this concept of no pollutants allowed into these areas. These conditions will be based in part on a study that I'll refer to in a little bit. Continuing on with some of our other issues, we think that over-irrigation causes a multitude of problems, from fire hazard in the coastal canyons to harming some of our slope structures, to saturating the street subgrade, to getting into our garages and basements, and then certainly the last one, carrying fecal indicator bacteria, that's FIB, and pollutants into storm drains, and then to the bay and to the beach areas. Continuing on with more issues, Upper Bay and Lower Bay have 4 TMDLs, otherwise known as total maximum daily loads. These are very complex. They're very regulatory in scope. They go through a myriad different approvals as they go up, including US EPA, and they address sediment, nutrients, fecal coliform, and toxic pollutants. So just a snapshot of the sediment TMDL, for instance, that's the one that says the Upper Bay has to be dredged. We also have emerging threats coming at us. Pyrethroids is one of them. This is a replacement for a pesticide that was removed from the shelves that killed ants and roaches up and down the watershed. So pyrethroids was thought to be the next best thing to replace the pesticides known as diazinon and chlorpyrifos. And we're finding that indeed is getting into the urban runoff stream and killing the little critters that are used as an indicator of environmental health within the mudflat of the bays. Another one is endocrine inhibitors. When people don't finish their prescriptions and flush them down the toilet, that gets into the waste stream, and then that gets picked up in recycled water, for instance, in the Irvine Ranch Water District area, and that ends up coming down into the bay and into our creeks through that. Continuing on with our issues, there are 3 areas of the bay that don't meet state standards for fecal indicator bacteria. Those are 33rd Street, Old Newport Boulevard, and 38th, although one of them, 33rd, is doing much better. So we're hoping that will, a long-term posting, it's called, where there's always a sign up in those areas saying those waters are unsafe for swimming, that long-term posting will come down. That will dramatically improve our statewide numbers when the county has to report this data to the state. As you know, there's a need for significant and extensive dredging in the Upper Bay and Lower Bay. That involves dealing with our eelgrass challenge and certainly involves funding. Copper paint is a big issue for us. It may be a prime contributor to copper contamination in the bay, especially the Lower Bay, and some of that may be getting out to the ASBS area. And then from a city staff perspective, we always look towards what's called our NPDES permit. That's the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. You don't have to worry about that so much, but this is the permit by the regional board, so the water quality body that governs us, that tells us exactly what we need to do as a city government, and what we need to ask our residents to do. These are some of the problem areas. Mentioned 38th Street and 33rd, that's really around Newport Island. The old Newport Boulevard and Arches, that has a problem with fecal coliform bacteria. That does too. Upper and Lower Bay generally have a problem with sediment, nutrients, bacteria, and toxicity. The Rhine Channel has a specific problem with toxics in the sediment that date back to the 40s and 50s. And then here are kind of our ASBS areas, and if it went down the page, we'd continue that way all the way to roughly where the trailers used to be on the beach between Laguna Beach and Newport Beach. Let me tell you about a little bit what programs are underway. This city is one of the most aggressive in the county about street sweeping, including the daily sweeping in many areas of town, including our alley sweeping program. Most cities don't do that. We have a large-scale catch basin screening program It's a very cheap and effective way of keeping trash out of the storm drain. If you can keep the trash out of the storm drain, you keep the thing that will eventually make a biological stew, a bacterial stew, out of the storm drain. So I think that's really reduced our counts of bacteria out, especially around 33rd Street and 38th Street. And it's cheap. They're about $15 a piece. It does involve general services putting them in and taking them out. So it just means this trash gets picked up by the street sweeper instead of falling into the storm drains. We have a newly constructed bioswale across from Hoag Hospital and up a little bit on the old Newport Boulevard side. That's intended to treat the water for bacteria and nutrients before it gets into the lower bay. Back Bay Science Center, as you folks know, is complete, and now we're working on tenant improvements, and there'll be an education program there. And of course, this city dedicates an extensive amount of resources towards our sanitary system overflow prevention, otherwise known as stopping sewer spills. This is a picture of the bioswale right after it was built. This is a picture of the catch basin screen for folks at home who haven't seen those. Those go up and down depending on the season. They're not up in the wintertime, so we don't have a risk of clogging the drain. Other programs that are underway, the city has had the Coastal Bay Water Quality Committee for eons, long before I got here. Not many cities have that. We also have a cross-trained code enforcement and water quality enforcement division, as you know. We do citations for commercial areas and auto retailers that don't properly reclaim wash water. One of my favorite stories I told the Water Quality Committee, I was walking in another town and stopped a guy who was discharging wash material from the mobile detail into the storm drain, and he said, hey, don't you know you're supposed to dam that up? And the guy said, oh, no, they only require that in Newport Beach. We don't do it elsewhere. So I thought that was good news and sad news. So we're in the last year of sponsoring a 5th grade education program on water quality with the Newport Harbor Nautical Museum. That would move to the Back Bay Science Center next year, hopefully. Environmental science class, AP, at CDM High School is in there too. We're really good about complying with our NPDES permits. I'm going to knock on wood as I say that because our first audit was really strong. We're going to be audited again soon. But 3 Orange County cities were fined for not complying. And then we also have 2 active storm drain to sewer diversions, one at the Newport Dunes and a new one at Pelican Point. As you know, too, we have a large-scale smart irrigation controller program focused on the southern part of town, the ASBS area. We have major restoration projects underway, including at Big Canyon Creek. That's in its planning stages. Morning Canyon, Buck Gully stabilization, again, draining into the ASBS. Your general plan speaks very much about water quality and its importance. We, on an annual basis, and this time of year on a weekly and monthly basis, maintain trash booms in and around Newport Bay, and then the county helps us by maintaining some in the San Diego Creek and the Santa Ana Delhi Channel. And we have a long-standing Adopt a Beach program for trash and debris removal on our ocean and bay beaches. Other things that we do, too, we do help monitor household water use. I think if this is when people will ask us to do that for them, to try and see what the big users are, and then we've targeted our ET controller program to those users. We've have a fairly extensive program in water quality monitoring throughout our canyons. There's a landscape program underway about if someone wanted to choose California-friendly landscaping, here's how to do it. And as the general plan calls out, a tiered water rate structure discussion. So that, I think, is finished up the RFP stage, and we'll be bringing that back to the Coastal Bay Water Quality Committee and then to council eventually for a decision. A draft irrigation and landscape ordinance is under review, too, again, by that committee. Part of our ASBS effort involves a tide pool public use study at Little Corona and a mussel bioaccumulation study. I like to point to this chart. This is the city of Newport Beach, and these are our enforcement actions. This is from a year ago or so, because the reporting trails that. This isn't to say we pick on our residents this much. This is because a lot of these enforcement actions are what we call knock and talks, where we'll just go up to somebody and say, hey, did you know you shouldn't be doing that, and here's why. And most people take that information and change their behaviors, so that does include that. But I guess it paints a sadder picture of what some of the other cities are doing. You can see San Clemente, a coastal city, is doing well. Fountain Valley has a 600, but I think a number of the other cities could help us out by doing a little bit more, because the violations are certainly happening. Then the main purpose of this discussion today was to talk about some of our grant projects, and I'll move to a diagram that you folks saw on the Saturday that we did the workshop.
Well, Dave, before you do that,
Sure.
I'm kind of intrigued by that last slide. And how about the cities in our watershed that, feed into San Diego Creek? It looks like some of them are,
like this would be
pretty
Irvine.
pathetic. I mean, having the TMDLs, didn't that, get their attention that they needed to do something very different?
You would think so, and I think the audits that these cities are seeing are going to start to look at this. And again, I don't think it means that our residents are behaving more poorly than others. Look at Costa Mesa. We know we have some problems in Costa Mesa. We know we have problems in Irvine. They're just not oriented towards water quality citations. They're more oriented towards other things, and this is almost ancillary to what they do. But the TMDLs will direct them to start to reach pollutant limits, especially in the next permit term, the NPDES permit term. So again, kind of starting to lead into our grant projects, we have a large grant associated with the Newport Coast watershed that involves these categories: runoff reduction, a whole kind of a capital project program for that watershed, some improvements to Buck Gully to limit erosion, and then to create a water quality wetlands up there, and that's under construction now. It's all under the auspices of that one grant. We also received a grant from the Bureau of Reclamation that helps us fund the ET controllers, and I think we're up to about 600 installations out in that watershed area. The other thing that you'll hear more about is this concept of an IRWIMP, or an Integrated Regional Watershed Management Program. And this is an attempt by the state to wrap a bunch of grants into one package and then to release them in a coordinated way. And what they say to the localities that apply for grants is, hey, you can apply for this grant for this little project and this grant for this little project, but we'd really like you to actually prioritize and consolidate your grant requests into one big management plan for your region. Thus that all the terms in that IRWIMP. And so this is wrapped up. We've wrapped up the Harbor Area Management Plan, which is a way to look at balancing the economic and environmental needs of the lower harbor and trying to set priorities and a plan for improving the lower harbor based on those realities. It's looked at how to manage the upper bay's environment and its park resources so that the public can still use it and enjoy it while still protecting the habitat. And then this concept of looking inland, looking up into the watershed to make sure that the cities upstream are doing what they can to reduce sediment, reduce nutrients, reduce bacteria and toxics. So one of the key areas we look for is Prop 50. We have asked for special funding for that ASBS protection. So we have one grant just oriented towards the ASBS. Those are the materials within it. The Big Canyon Creek Restoration Project has been funded to the tune of about $800,000 with grant monies. That's just for planning. We expect the same grantors to offer us some construction funding as well. As you know, the Back Bay Science Center is a partnership of several agencies with grants. And then, as noted, our irrigation improvements are associated with grants from Bureau of Reclamation. Finishing up here, some of the other efforts we're working on, securing funding for upper and lower bay dredging, and Councilmember Daigle and others have really put a focus on that, and that's appreciated. Harbor Commission and Harbor Resources have worked on some strategies. We're revisiting the 1991 Southern California eelgrass mitigation policy to make sure that eelgrass is managed sensibly and doesn't adversely affect the economic value of the lower harbor. NPDES permit renewal, I mentioned that. The BITE 08 study, this is a comprehensive study. A BITE is a stretch of beach, but a huge stretch of beach. It could be anywhere from San Pedro down to San Clemente, that would look at water quality in that comprehensive way instead of just piecemeal city by city. And then as the members of the Coastal Bay Water Quality Committee are familiar with, we're working with the state board and the regional board on making sure that this rather absurd interpretation of the California Ocean Plan, which would say that no pollutants at all could go into that area, that interpretation is loosened and to be something that's still water quality protected, but much more sensible.
Can that be funded through the unfunded mandate program, since that's a mandate that they're putting upon us?
You would think, yes. I think we certainly talked to Glenn Everett about that. I want to close, before I put up the diagram, and maybe we'll go through, if you have any questions, with just kind of some principles that we as staff think are appropriate, that your council should always review our project priorities annually via Water Quality Master Plan, and you talked about that 2 Saturdays ago, and then the Coastal Bay Water Quality Committee has a subcommittee working on just this, and we met last Friday. And then within that master plan, we need to propose priorities reflecting a number of things, certainly community interest, next regulatory directives, because there are some things we know we're going to be told to do, so we might as well try and budget for those and prepare for those. Our long-term maintenance obligations of whatever we buy into. If we put in a bioswale, we're going to have to maintain the bioswale over many years. And certainly what matching funds would be required through the general fund, because that's a component of every state grant we get. So with that, I'll take some questions and comments if you have any, and also I'm going to put up that screen.
Mayor Pro Tem Daigle?
Yes, I know Councilwoman Gardner is very involved with the governance of the executive through the Executive Watershed Committee on is it the 600 or the 800 acre watershed? And in looking at integrated, is that kind of the way of the future in terms of how things are going to be looked at from grants and everything?
It is. That executive committee that the city is a member of and Councilmember Gardner sits on is reviewing with us our integrated regional watershed management plan, and we work together with the county and with another big player, the Urban Ranch Water District, in that application.
How many acres is that watershed again?
Bob, do you know off the top of your head? I want to say, no, the whole, I think it's like 250 square miles. Is it 150?
To touch,
140 acres to a square mile.
follow up with what Councilmember Daigle was talking about. On the executive committee, the Newport Bay Executive Committee, one of the things we have done, for example, is look upstream and support the Serrano Creek restoration. And you say, well, why are we worrying about that? Well, because we found that was a major contributor of sediment to the bay, so it made sense. And because of this regional approach, we were able to get a lot of work done there that will help us a great deal down the road.
Councilman Curry?
Yes, Dave, good report. As I mentioned before, the new renewed Measure M provides about $200 million for runoff remediation from highway and transportation projects. Much of it finds its way into San Diego Creek and ultimately into our bay. They're still developing criteria and processes for how they're going to allocate those funds, but I would hope that we are sort of all over that process and sort of first in the queue in terms of strategies for how that can be utilized to reduce upstream runoff that comes into Newport Beach. The second issue is I think we may want to think about revitalizing the legislative committee and working with Congressman Campbell's office, who has some ideas about jurisdictional transfers, and Senator Harmon, who has some ideas about bond funding and other ideas, so that we have a legislative strategy to address on a long-term basis the funding shortfalls that seem to be an habitual issue, both with the Upper Bay and certainly with the Lower Bay. And put that into a comprehensive strategy. That may include, for example, creating a joint powers authority with some of our upstream partners so that some of the improvements that need to be done quickly and are being held up by federal funding can be financed on an interim basis through the JPA with proportional participation until the funding from the federal government catches up with us. Those are some things to think about so that we can put the resources into play to address the kind of issues that you've very well identified today.
Councilmember Curry, we're particularly excited about Measure M having that ability because that's arguably a concept whereby we could apply for Measure M funds and use those funds to match our grant applications. It doesn't have to come specifically from the general fund. There are other opportunities to match that. and that's one of them.
Dave, I think I saw within the last couple of weeks, and I can't remember where, I think it was on the email, maybe it was the San Diego Regional Water Quality Board that is now taking a look at regulating wet water,
Stormwater.
Stormwater flows.
Yeah.
Has there been any talk about that by our board, and do you see that as being something that's probably down the road but coming?
It's an interesting dynamic between the two regional boards, and the San Diego Regional Board applies to Southern Orange County and all of San Diego, and we're in the Santa Ana Regional Board jurisdiction, and that's because of the Santa Ana River. They're organized by watershed. The San Diego Board is more aggressive in trying to directly regulate now stormwater as well as dry weather flows, and it'll be very challenging for those jurisdictions to try to comply with, challenging for us as well if it were to be applied for us. The Santa Ana region doesn't tend to be as aggressive. They tend to want to work more with the cities on things like this, so we'll keep our fingers crossed, because it's cost prohibitive when you try and address that, and I say that as someone in a city that I think is very protective of water quality.
Dave, I saw somewhere, I don't know if it was on, I think it was in some of our literature somewhere, that there was talk of a, I think it was called a Water Quality Enterprise Fund or something like that. Could you describe what that is?
Sure, Mayor Selich. There was a member of the Coastal Bay Water Quality Committee brought forward a concept that San Clemente does, where they have asked the voters to approve specifically an increase in a fee. It's I think it's $5 to $10 a month that they pay, and that's dedicated just towards water quality improvements. And San Clemente did that because they were in a different cash position than Newport Beach is. But their concept was you set aside directly set aside funds just for street sweeping and catch basin cleaning, where we handle that with our general fund. San Clemente argued that they'd be unable to do that without this fee increase. So the Coastal Bay Water Quality Committee at its last meeting said they'd kind of back burner that as we develop the water quality master plan, because as I've said to that committee, there has never been a time when we as staff have gone to the council for a water quality improvement project and you've said no. So I don't see that need is here in Newport Beach today.
Okay, I guess I had a different idea of an enterprise fund on that, what it might be. My other question is, have you put together, or do you plan on putting together some kind of a spreadsheet or something that shows all of these grant programs and everything that we're doing, that shows how much funding we're getting from these different sources, and then what we're committing in terms of our match, so that we can see what we're getting, how much it's costing us, and how it fits in the big picture?
I have not done so, but I expect to do so as a part of the master plan, because I was trying to mirror it like the facilities financing plan, because I thought that was a good layout of not just the priorities and timing of capital, but also where funds might be coming from, as well as where we've committed funds to date, and where we can expect to ask the council for a matching requirement. And then you can give that thumbs up or thumbs down.
Councilman Henn?
Just what do you have a target date in mind for the first surfacing to council of the water quality master plan?
Our subcommittee meets on it in 2 weeks, and then I think it would go to the full water quality committee in February, so then potentially in March, assuming we're in good enough shape to bring it forward.
Okay. Councilman Gardner?
I just wanted to go back a bit to this idea of what San Diego did in trying to get this absolute zero runoff, basically, which would include stormwater. The real issue we have here is not, well, I shouldn't say the real issue. There's several issues, but in addition to just the exorbitant cost of trying to control stormwater, if you've ever been down to Buck Gully during a big storm, well, it took out that whole little dam during El Nino. The other issue is that that's the source of the sediment for Buck Gully, for Little Corona. So if we somehow diverted the water or dammed it up, we would have no sand down there. So it's a much more complicated issue than simply what's going in there. And then we also don't necessarily know that everything that's coming down there is harmful. And so we're hoping to get some studies that would show, at least if you're going to make us do this, you better be able to prove that it really is damaging to sea life and everything else.
Good point.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. Thank you, Dave. Okay. Public comments on non-agenda items? Anybody want to address the council on anything not on the agenda? Okay, we're adjourned.